When I first saw the house, the fog was rolling in from the Atlantic like something alive. It slithered between the trees, crept over the gravel road, and curled around the porch posts like pale fingers. For a second, I thought the whole town was dissolving into the mist. Bar Harbor reduced to a few silhouettes and a single crooked mailbox with my name written in fading black marker, Carter. I killed the engine and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, listening to the wind whisper through the pines. Maggie, my golden retriever, shifted in the passenger seat and let out a low, uncertain whine. She'd been fine for most of the drive up from Boston, but as soon as we passed the "Welcome to Hancock County" sign, she'd started acting like something unseen was pacing beside the car. "Yeah, I know, girl," I murmured. Creepy as hell. I'd come here to start over. A year ago, my marriage had collapsed. A slow-motion car crash I couldn't stop watching. The city that once felt alive now felt claustrophobic, suffocating. I needed quiet, space, time. When I saw the ad for the rental cottage overlooking Frenchman Bay, affordable long-term lease, pet-friendly private land, ocean view, it felt like fate. But standing there in the mist, with the trees shifting like restless bodies, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe fate had a dark sense of humor. The cottage was smaller than I expected, a single-story wood-shingled house with peeling paint and a sagging roof. But it had character, the kind of place that looked like it had survived storms, maybe a few generations of secrets. I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath my boots, and pulled the key from my pocket. The front door opened with a groan that echoed through the stillness. Inside, the air smelled faintly of salt, cedar, and old books. Maggie bounded in ahead of me, nose twitching, tail wagging cautiously. The living room had a stone fireplace, built-in shelves, and a wide window that faced the sea. Somewhere out there, hidden beyond the fog, waves rolled against the rocks like a heartbeat. I should have felt peace. Instead, I felt watched. It wasn't just paranoia. I swear I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, circling the house. Maggie froze, ears perked, staring at the window. The fog pressed against the glass like a living thing, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shape in it, tall, still, and facing us. Then it was gone. I exhaled, shaking off the chill that crawled up my spine. Just fog, I told myself. Fog and nerves. It wasn't until I unpacked the last box that I noticed the cellar door. It was in the hallway, half hidden behind a wooden coat rack, secured with an old iron latch. The previous tenant had nailed it shut. A hand-painted sign hung above it, letters faded but still legible. Keep closed, always. At first, I laughed. Maybe it was a local joke. Old house quirks, but the nails weren't decorative. They were driven deep into the frame, black with rust, like someone had been trying to keep something in, not out. That was the first time I felt it. The subtle tremor under my feet, like the ground itself had taken a breath. The vibration lasted less than a second, but it left the glasses in the kitchen cabinet rattling. Maggie barked once, sharp and startled, then pressed herself against my leg. And then it was over. I told myself it was just a truck passing on the highway. Only there wasn't a highway anywhere near this quiet little coastal town. That night, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the fog drift across the yard. A faint golden glow from the lighthouse on Mount Desert Rock flickered through the mist like a dying pulse. The wind carried the faint scent of brine and pine needles. Somewhere far off, a church bell tolled. Slow, mournful, and wrong. It wasn't the hour. It was 4:13 a.m. I checked my phone. The time matched. The bell tolled again, 3 3 times in total, then silence. A moment later, Maggie began to growl, low and guttural, her gaze fixed toward the tree line behind the house. I followed her eyes and saw nothing, just fog and shadows. But the hairs on the back of my neck rose as if someone was standing behind me, breathing softly against my skin. That's when I heard it. A sound so deep it wasn't really heard. It was felt, like a subwoofer buried beneath the world. The air trembled, the coffee mug vibrated in my hand. Maggie whimpered, pressing herself to the ground. It lasted only a few seconds. When it stopped, the silence was deafening. Then, from somewhere far out over the water, a voice, faint but distinct, called my name. "Ethan." I froze. The voice came again, closer this time, breaking into static halfway through like it was coming through an old radio. "Ethan, help." I dropped the mug. It shattered across the porch, but I didn't move. The fog thickened, swirling toward the shore. I couldn't see anything beyond 10 feet, but I could feel something watching, something vast, intelligent, and old. Maggie barked once and bolted back inside, tail tucked, whining at the door. My body finally remembered how to move, and I stumbled after her, locking the door, heart hammering. For a long time I stood in the dark living room listening. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock, slow, steady, indifferent. Then the minute hand clicked into place. 4:13 a.m., and the bell rang again, once, from somewhere deep beneath the earth. If you're hearing this story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to subscribe and help the channel grow. Your support keeps stories like this alive, and believe me, what happened next in Bar Harbor only gets stranger. By morning, the fog had thinned, but it hadn't disappeared. It hung in streaks across the treetops, drifting over the roofs of Bar Harbor like smoke after a quiet fire. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale mist at the window and heard that low, impossible sound echoing beneath the earth. I told myself it was exhaustion, my mind replaying the stress of moving, of loss, of trying to build something new out of the ashes of what I'd left behind. But part of me knew that wasn't it. You don't imagine something that deep, that physical. Maggie followed me everywhere that morning, keeping close enough that her fur brushed against my leg as I moved. I kept checking the cellar door, half expecting it to be unlatched. It wasn't. The nails were still in place, but I swear the old wood looked tighter, as if something inside had pulled it from the other side. I needed people, conversation, normalcy. The drive into town took 15 minutes, winding along a coastal road lined with pines and weather-beaten houses. Bar Harbor in daylight was beautiful, too beautiful maybe, the kind of beauty that hides things in plain sight. Bright awnings over coffee shops, neat flower boxes under every window, the faint smell of salt and seaweed in the air. The locals looked ordinary enough. They smiled politely when I walked past, nodded when I held doors open, but there was something rehearsed about their friendliness, like they were following a script they didn't quite believe in. The diner on Main Street was called the Rusty Spoon, though the sign had long since faded to a dull ghost of paint. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, maple syrup, and old wood polish. A woman behind the counter looked up when I entered, mid-40s, auburn hair tied back, eyes bright but tired. Her name tag read, Sarah. "Morning," she said, smiling in that warm, practiced way small-town servers do. "You must be new around here." "Guess it's that obvious." She poured me a mug of coffee before I'd even ordered. "Only so many faces in Bar Harbor. You stick out until you don't." Ethan Carter, I said, offering my hand. Sarah Whitmore, welcome to the quiet end of Maine. Quiet. The word clung to me like fog. You've got that right, I said, stirring cream into the coffee. Almost too quiet. Last night felt strange. Her smile faltered for just a second. Barely noticeable, but it was there. Strange how? There was a noise, I said. A deep one, almost like thunder, but not really. It came from the ground, I think. And the church bell rang at 4 a.m. Her hand froze over the coffee pot. For a heartbeat, she looked at me the way someone might look at a wound they can't help touching. Then she recovered. Probably the tide, she said lightly. When it rolls in, it shakes things up a little. Old pipes shifting ground. Bells around here have a mind of their own too. Salt air messes with the mechanisms. It was a decent explanation, casual, rehearsed, too smooth. Before I could press further, a man in his 60s slid into the booth across from me without asking. He wore a fisherman's jacket, hands calloused and eyes sharp. Don't mind Sarah, he said. She's been telling that same lie for years. Sarah shot him a glare. Caleb! He grinned at her, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. What? Guy deserves to know. I turned to him. Know what? Caleb leaned forward, lowering his voice. That sound you heard? It's older than this town. Older than the water it sits on. Sarah's tone turned cold. He's kidding. Caleb likes to scare the newcomers. I'm not joking, he said. You're staying out by Frenchman Bay, right? That area's not quiet because it's peaceful. It's quiet because people don't stay. I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or listen. And why's that? He sipped his coffee and said, because the ocean remembers everything that's taken from it, and it doesn't like to be ignored. Sarah slammed the pot back onto the burner. That's enough, Caleb. He just smiled, sliding out of the booth. Welcome to Bar Harbor, Mr. Carter. If you're smart, you'll keep your lights on after dark and your windows closed. He tipped an imaginary hat, then walked out, leaving the bell above the door jingling behind him. Sarah sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Don't mind him. He's harmless, just superstitious. Superstitious about what? Stories, sea legends. People around here like to hold on to them. I nodded, but she wouldn't meet my eyes again. By the time I finished breakfast, the fog outside had lifted completely. The sunlight made the streets look alive again, though something about the town felt staged, like a postcard scene that would fall apart if you looked at it too long. On my way back to the car, I passed a hardware store. In the window was a display of padlocks, latches, and lengths of chain. A handwritten sign read, Storm Season Specials. The owner, a wiry man with gray hair and a cigarette hanging from his lips, stepped out as I approached. Need something. Stranger. Just looking, I said. He eyed me for a moment, then nodded toward the hardware racks. If you're renting that cottage off Harbor Road, take this. He picked up an old iron latch from a shelf and held it out. Sturdy, works better than the new ones. Don't ask why, just install it on the cellar door. I frowned. How do you know where I live? He took a drag on his cigarette. Small town. Everyone knows everything. Then, after a pause, sometimes it's better that way. I took the latch. It was heavier than it looked, cold even in the sunlight. How much do I owe you? He shook his head. On the house. That night, I attached the latch to the cellar door. The nails squealed when I pulled them out, like the wood itself protested. Inside, I caught the faint smell of damp earth and metal. The air coming up from below was cold enough to sting my face. I didn't see much, just a set of stairs descending into blackness. I started to close the door, but then something scraped against the concrete down there. A dragging sound, slow and wet, like stone grinding against bone. Maggie growled, backing away. I slammed the door shut and locked the new latch. For a while, I just stood there, breathing hard, listening to the silence on the other side. When it came again, it wasn't a sound. It was a vibration, a deep pulse that rolled through the floor, rattling the dishes and picture frames. Maggie barked frantically. My phone vibrated on the table, lighting up with a time that made my blood go cold. 4:13 a.m., and from somewhere below the floorboards came a single, hollow knock. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of gulls and the taste of metal in my mouth. The house felt heavier somehow, as though the walls were holding their breath. Every instinct told me to pack up, grab Maggie, and drive south until the sea was a memory in my rearview mirror. But fear has a strange way of turning into curiosity when daylight comes. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation, something geological, mechanical, normal. Bar Harbor wasn't far, and if the town had answers, they'd be buried somewhere quiet, under dust and denial. The public library sat at the end of Main Street, an old brick building with ivy crawling up the sides and a carved whale over the entrance. Inside, the air smelled like salt and paper, the way old stories always do. A woman at the front desk looked up as I entered. She was in her 50s, with silver hair pinned into a bun and sharp, curious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her name tag read Ruth Davenport. "Morning," she said. "You must be new around here. What can I help you find?" "Local history," I said. "Anything about geological disturbances, maybe earthquakes. I heard a sound last night. It was strong enough to shake my house." Ruth's expression didn't change, but her posture did. The kind of stillness people get when they recognize a question they don't want to answer. "What kind of sound?" "Low," I said. "Like a subsonic vibration. It started around 4 a.m. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where fog was beginning to form again over the trees. "You're staying out by Frenchman Bay, aren't you?" I nodded. "How'd you guess?" "You have that look." "What look is that?" "The look of someone who's heard it." She rose from behind the counter and motioned for me to follow. Her footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor as she led me down a narrow hall to a room marked Archives. Inside were rows of wooden filing cabinets, a microfilm reader, and stacks of bound newspapers dating back almost a century. Ruth ran her fingers along the spines like someone greeting old friends. "You won't find much in the papers," she said. "Most stories never made it to print. But sometimes if you read between the lines, you can see the shadows of what really happened." She pulled out a drawer labeled 1950, 1960 and handed me a stack of folders. "Start here." I sat at the reading table, scanning yellowed pages, town council minutes, incident reports, missing person notices. The older the files, the stranger the language became. Words like the hum, the calling, the ground's voice. One entry stood out, on March 3rd, 1958. Fishermen report tremors near Frenchman Bay. 2 boats lost at sea. Locals claim to have heard voices from beneath the water. Investigation inconclusive. 2 boats, I murmured. "That's the same year the ferry went missing, isn't it?" Ruth stopped stacking files and turned toward me, her eyes cautious. "You've heard that story. Just pieces. Something about a storm that swallowed a ferry and 40-something passengers." 46, she said quietly. The Port Ellen, it was bound for Winter Harbor, never arrived. No wreckage ever found. Do you think it's connected to the sound? Ruth hesitated, then sighed. I think everything here is connected to it. The earth remembers what we bury, and sometimes it doesn't forgive us for it. Her words lingered like fog. I tried to smile. You sound like Caleb. Her expression softened. Caleb Frost? He's still telling newcomers his stories. Something about the ocean remembering. Ruth looked past me toward the window. He's not wrong, just incomplete. What do you mean? Instead of answering, she crossed the room to a locked cabinet and pulled out a key. From inside, she retrieved a single photograph in a cracked frame. An old black and white image of men standing near a dock, their faces blurred by motion. In the corner of the frame, I recognized something impossible. The cottage I was renting, freshly built and bright, sitting on a cliff above the water. This was taken in 1958, Ruth said. Your house belonged to a man named Samuel Carter. I blinked. Carter, that's my last name. I know, she said. That's why I knew you'd come. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and for a second I thought the floor moved. What happened to him? Ruth placed the photograph on the table. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He was the lighthouse keeper on Mount Desert Rock before he bought that property. They say he heard the sound first, before anyone else. He tried to warn the town, said the sea was talking to him. People laughed. A week later, the Port Ellen vanished, and Samuel disappeared the following month. Disappeared how? No one knows. They found his dog on the beach, barking at the water. Everything else was gone. A chill ran down my spine. Was there ever a... Before I could finish, the floor trembled. Just a small shiver. But it was there. The window panes quivered. Somewhere in the distance, a faint bell rang. Ruth's eyes met mine. You should go home, Mr. Carter. What? Before dark, and if you hear the bell again, don't answer it. The drive back felt longer than before. The fog thickened, swallowing the coastline in strips of white. My mind replayed her words over and over. You have that look, you've heard it. When I reached the house, the sky was already dimming. Maggie was waiting by the door, tail low, ears pinned back. I poured a drink and sat on the porch, watching the tide crawl in. At 4:12 a.m., the wind died. Every light in the house flickered once, twice, then went out. Then came the bell. 4 chimes this time, slow, deliberate. Each one felt heavier than the last. I gripped the armrest of the chair, heart pounding, and then, from the cellar, the latch began to rattle. The latch rattled once, then stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, not the kind of silence you get in an empty room, but the kind that seems to swallow sound itself. The air in the house thickened, dense and cold. I rose slowly, every nerve straining, and stared down the hall toward the cellar door. Maggie whimpered from the corner of the living room, low and desperate, a sound I'd never heard from her before. Her tail was tucked tight, her body pressed flat to the floor. The latch moved again. This time it didn't just shake, it twisted. The metal creaked under pressure from the other side, like something was turning it with deliberate patience. I told myself it had to be a draft, a settling foundation, a trick of old wood and imagination, but deep down, I didn't believe a word of it. Maggie, I whispered, my voice trembling. Stay. I stepped closer, each footfall sounding impossibly loud. The latch stopped moving, but the cold deepened until I could see my breath. The air smelled faintly of iron and salt water. I reached out a hand, not sure what I meant to do. Stop it. touch it or prove to myself it was real. Before I could make contact, a hollow thud came from the other side, then another, 3 times. Slow, deliberate. I froze. The pattern wasn't random. It was like someone knocking, waiting for me to answer. "Hello?" I said before I could stop myself. The moment the word left my mouth, I regretted it. Because the knocking stopped, and something else answered. A voice. Faint, muffled, and wet, as though it was speaking through water. "Ethan." My heart dropped into my stomach. The sound wasn't coming from behind the door anymore. It was coming from beneath it, from deep below the floorboards. Maggie barked once, sharp and terrified, then bolted down the hall towards the front door, scratching frantically to get out. I snapped out of my trance, grabbed her leash, and yanked the door open. The night air hit like ice. Outside, fog blanketed the yard so thick I could barely see the fence line. But there, faintly, through the shifting white, I saw a movement. A figure standing near the tree line. It was tall and thin, shoulders slightly hunched. Too far away to make out the face, but close enough to know it was looking right at me. "Who's there?" I called. The figure didn't move. It just tilted its head like it was studying me. Maggie's leash strained against my hand. Her whole body was trembling. Then, as the fog thickened, I realized something. There weren't just one set of eyes in the dark. There were many. Dozens, low to the ground, shining faintly like reflections in water. I backed toward the house, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to run. But the ground beneath me began to vibrate again. Slow, deep, rhythmic. It wasn't like the earlier tremors. This was alive. The porch steps shook, the boards groaned, and then the bell rang again. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Each toll rolled through the air like thunder underwater. The figures in the fog began to move, not toward me, but away, a melting back into the woods, disappearing between the pines until the yard was empty again. The vibration stopped. The fog held still, and just like that, the night went silent. I stood there until the first light of dawn turned the sky gray. When the sun finally broke through, everything looked normal. No footprints in the yard, no marks on the porch, no sign of the figures I'd seen. But when I went back inside, the cellar door was wide open. The new latch, the one I'd installed the day before, was lying bent on the floor. I stared down the stairs, but the darkness was absolute. No sound, no movement, just a breath of cold air that rose from below, smelling faintly of brine. I should have left right then, packed the car, taken Maggie, and driven until Bar Harbor was a ghost behind me. But something stopped me. Curiosity, pride, the need to know what I'd just seen. Maybe all of it. Instead of running, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped closer to the open doorway. My hand shook as I pointed the beam downward. The light caught the concrete steps, slick with moisture. A few more inches and it hit something else. Metal. A door handle. Not part of the foundation, but a smaller door built into the earth itself. Half buried in the dirt. It shouldn't have been there. There was no reason for a second door beneath the house. No record of a basement room when I'd signed the lease. Yet there it was. Old, corroded, and breathing cold air. I crouched at the top of the stairs, every muscle screaming to back away, but the beam of the flashlight reflected off something carved into the metal. Letters, etched deep and rough. 4 words. Do not open. The sea. A sound rose from behind that buried door. Low, hollow, and full of movement. Not one voice this time, but many. Dozens whispering together in a rhythm that almost sounded like waves crashing. and beneath all of them, faint but unmistakable, a single word formed in the air. "Carter." I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the stairs and went out. By the time I stumbled back into the living room and slammed the cellar door shut, my breath was coming in ragged bursts. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my heartbeat, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. When I finally looked up, Maggie was sitting by the window, staring out at the sea. Her reflection caught the morning light just right, and for a split second, I could have sworn there was another face beside hers, not human, pale, translucent, and smiling. I blinked, and it was gone. That was the moment I realized Bar Harbor wasn't just another quiet coastal town. It was a trap, one that didn't need to chase you, because eventually it made you come closer on your own. Later, when people asked me why I didn't leave after that first week, I never knew what to tell them. The truth is simple and awful. I stayed because I wanted answers, and in Bar Harbor, every answer waits below the surface. By the time the sun lifted over Frenchman Bay, the house smelled like damp wood and old iron. The broken cellar latch lay on the counter beside a half-drunk mug of coffee, evidence that last night hadn't been a dream. I'd spent hours convincing myself the door had only swollen from moisture, that the rattling was wind. But the dent in the metal was shaped like a handprint. Maggie wouldn't go near the hallway anymore. She lay by the front window, chin on her paws, staring at the sea as though waiting for something to come back out of it. I needed daylight, noise, people, anything that wasn't whispering floorboards and vibrating walls. So I fixed the latch as best I could, double-checked the locks, and drove into town. Bar Harbor looked normal again. Lobster boats rocked lazily at the dock, gulls screeched overhead, tourists and windbreakers snapped photos near the whale-watching kiosk. You'd never guess that somewhere under all that postcard calm, something ancient was breathing. I parked outside the Rusty Spoon and went inside. Sarah was already behind the counter, pouring coffee for a pair of fishermen. She looked up, gave me the polite half-smile she'd given everyone yesterday, but her eyes flicked briefly toward the door, as if checking whether I'd brought someone with me. "Morning, stranger," she said. "Sleep any better?" "Define better." She set a mug in front of me. "Still hearing things?" "Still feeling them," I said. "You ever notice how quiet it gets before it starts, like the whole town's holding its breath?" Her hand hesitated over the sugar bowl. "You've got an imagination on you, Mr. Carter." "I wish that's all it was." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. The cellar door opened by itself last night. I heard something down there, a voice. Sarah's face drained of color. For a heartbeat, the clatter of plates and the murmur of customers seemed to fade. Then she forced a laugh that sounded brittle. Probably rats. These old coastal homes, full of holes. "Rats don't say my name," her smile faltered. "You should talk to the sheriff. He'll set you straight." Right on cue, the diner door opened and a gust of cold air followed Sheriff Lang inside. A tall man with shoulders like a barn beam and eyes that missed nothing. His badge looked older than the coat he wore it on. "Morning, folks," he said, scanning the room until his gaze landed on me. "You're the new tenant out by Harbor Road, aren't you?" "That's me." "Lang," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that felt more like a warning than a greeting. "Heard you had some excitement last night." "Excitement's one word for it." He slid into the booth across from me without asking. Sarah brought him coffee, then busied herself at the far end of the counter. Lang's eyes stayed on me. "We get a lot of first-timers who aren't used to the coastal tremors. Tide pressure can make the ground hum. Sounds worse at night." Sarah said the same thing, I replied. So did my landlord, but none of them mentioned voices. He smiled thinly. Voices? From below the house. Sounded like people calling my name. The sheriff took a slow sip of coffee. You sure you weren't dreaming? I don't dream in stereo. For a long moment he said nothing, just tapped one finger against the rim of his mug. Then, quietly, best not to talk about strange noises in public. Folks around here spook easy. Seems like they're already spooked. Lang's jaw tightened. Bar Harbor's been through enough storms. We value our peace. Let the ground make whatever noise it wants, long as nobody gets hurt. He stood, left a few bills on the table, and tipped his hat. Enjoy your stay, Mr. Carter. Keep your doors shut after dark. When he walked out, Sarah exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for the entire conversation. Was that supposed to comfort me? I asked. She shook her head. Around here, that was comfort. I finished my breakfast in silence. On my way out, I noticed a metal filing cabinet tucked behind the counter near the register. Its top drawer was labeled in fading typewriter print, property records, restricted. Something about that word restricted itched at me. Outside, the air had shifted. The fog was gone, but the wind carried a low hum that vibrated through my chest, like distant machinery. The same pitch I'd felt under the floorboards. I crossed Main Street to the general store to pick up supplies. The clerk, a kid barely 20, rang up my purchases without speaking until he saw my address on the receipt. Then his eyes flicked up fast. You're at the Carter place? Yeah, why? He swallowed hard. My granddad said nobody's lived there longer than a month. Said the place doesn't like tenants. Maybe it's just picky. He didn't laugh. On the drive home, the sky thickened with clouds. I tried the radio, but every station dissolved into static at the same frequency as the hum I'd been hearing. When I reached the cottage, Maggie greeted me at the door with her tail low. The house felt colder, emptier. I spent the afternoon pretending to work, answering client emails, revising a freelance piece about coastal ecology. But my mind kept drifting back to the diner, to the sheriff's veiled warning, to that cabinet labeled restricted. Just before dusk, I walked the property line, flashlight in hand. The earth was soft, damp from sea mist. Behind the house, half hidden by the overgrowth, I found something new, a small stone marker buried in the weeds. The inscription was almost worn away, but one line remained visible. S. Carter, 1958. The sea keeps what it takes. A gust of wind lifted off the water, carrying that same subterranean vibration up through the ground. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something deeper. Older, like the bay itself was turning over in its sleep. I looked back at the house, at the window where Maggie's silhouette waited, and I knew this wasn't over. If the town wouldn't talk, I'd have to make it. By the next morning, I'd decided that if I was going to stay in Bar Harbor, I needed facts, not stories, not superstition, but something solid. I'm a writer. Facts are what I build sense out of. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that sense itself was slowly slipping away from this place. The day was unusually bright for October. Sunlight glittered on the harbor like broken glass, but the air felt wrong, too still. Even the gulls were quiet. I walked into town with Maggie trotting close beside me, hoping that motion alone might calm my nerves. At first glance, Main Street could have belonged to any small New England town. Fresh paint, tidy storefronts, flower boxes outside the diner. But after a while, I began to notice the little things. White chalk marks drawn near the thresholds of every shop. Small pouches of dried herbs nailed above door frames. A crucifix turned upside down inside the window of the bakery. Somebody had gone to a lot of trouble to ward something off. When I reached the dock, Caleb Frost was sitting beside his boat, patching a net that looked older than both of us combined. His rough hands worked methodically, but his eyes kept flicking toward the water as though checking whether it was still there. "Morning, Mr. Carter," he said without looking up. I crouched beside him. "You ever going to tell me what's really going on here, Caleb?" He grinned without humor. "You already know. You just don't want to believe it. I know there's a sound that shouldn't exist, a sheriff who won't talk, and a library full of half-erased history, but I don't know why everyone pretends it's normal." Caleb stopped mending the net and looked straight at me. His pale blue eyes had that washed-out color you see in men who've spent too long staring at the horizon, because pretending keeps us alive. "Alive from what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the bay. "You see that water out there? It's bottomless, or close enough. They say it's where the ridge drops off, where the deep ocean begins. You ever been diving, Carter?" "Once, in the Keys." "Then you know what it's like when the light disappears. That's what lives down there. Darkness so heavy it eats sound. Every so often it remembers what we did to it. And it calls for something back." The way he said it made my skin prickle. "What did you do?" Caleb's hands tightened on the net rope until his knuckles went white. "You should go home, son. Get in your car, drive until the sea's behind you. This town made its peace with the deep long before you got here. Don't go digging." "I don't believe in curses," I said. "Then call it history." He went back to his net, conversation over. I stood there a long time watching the tide creep in. The water looked calm, but beneath the surface, I thought I could see faint movement, as if something vast was shifting far below. That afternoon, I walked to the town hall. The clerk behind the front desk, a woman with thinning blonde hair and the polite smile of someone who's used to ignoring questions, handed me a visitor's log to sign. "I'm researching property records," I said. "The house on Arbor Road." "Records are closed after 5, she replied automatically. "It's 2:30. She hesitated. "They're being reorganized." "Then maybe I can help reorganize them." Her smile didn't waver, but her voice lowered to a whisper. "You shouldn't ask about that house." "Why not?" Her eyes darted toward the sheriff's office down the hall, then back to me. "Because people who ask stop coming to town." I thanked her, left the building, and waited in the shadows of the alley until I saw her lights go off at 5. Then I went back. The side door's lock was old, one of those simple key turns you could open with a paper clip if you were patient. I told myself I wasn't breaking in, just borrowing time. The basement smelled of dust and mildew. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers labeled in careful handwriting. I found the section marked Property Records, 1950s, 1970s, and began pulling folders. That's when I saw it. An envelope tucked in the back, brittle with age. On the front, written in fading ink, were 4 words that stopped my breath. "Carter, do not file." Inside were 2 pages of typewritten notes. The first listed property transfers for the lot where my house now stood. The last name on the list was Samuel Carter, dated 1958. The next entry was blank. No sold, no deceased, just an empty line as though the record itself had swallowed him. The second page contained a list of names, each followed by a date. The most recent was 2 months ago. I recognized the pattern immediately. Each date fell on the first Monday of the month, and every name had the same note beside it: removed. The fluorescent light above me flickered. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying the faint scent of salt water. Maggie growled softly from the stairs. I turned and saw Sheriff Lang standing in the doorway. "You're not supposed to be down here, Carter." My mind scrambled for an excuse. The clerk must have forgotten to lock up. I was just reading things that aren't yours, he finished. His voice was calm, but the hand resting near his holster wasn't casual. "You strike me as a man who doesn't like warnings." "I like answers better." He stepped closer. "Then here's one for you. This town runs on routine. The ferry leaves at 7, the shops close at 8, and we don't talk about what happens after dark, understand? You can't keep ignoring it forever." Lang's eyes narrowed. "That's what people said to your grandfather, too." The world tilted again, just like it had in the library. "What did you say?" "You heard me. Samuel Carter. He thought he could fix what's wrong here. He was wrong." Before I could respond, a vibration rolled through the floor, deep, steady, impossible. The metal cabinets rattled in place. Lang didn't even flinch. "Go home, Ethan," he said quietly. "You've got 1 week until the next Monday. After that, the town'll decide what happens to you." He turned and walked away, leaving me in the flickering light with the envelope in my hand, and the realization that Bar Harbor's silence wasn't ignorance, it was survival. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that list of names, each one branded with the same final word: removed. The paper was still in my jacket pocket, crumpled from the way I'd been gripping it as I drove home from the town hall. The house was colder than usual. The fog outside had thickened until it pressed against the windows like a living thing. Maggie lay curled on the rug, twitching in her sleep, paws jerking as though she were running through some dream forest of her own. Around 2 in the morning, I unfolded the list again and spread it on the kitchen table. 20 names, 20 months, most of them strangers to the area, according to the addresses. Travelers, renters, seasonal workers. The last entry was dated August 4th, 2025, 2 months ago, and the next first Monday of the month was only 5 days away. I found myself whispering the names, one by one, as though saying them might somehow bring those people back. Martha Klein, Thomas Evers, Daniel Foy. Halfway down the list, a name made my heart skip: Avery Lang. The sheriff, or someone related to him. The note beside it was the same as the others: removed. Dated March 2021. Whatever was happening in Bar Harbor wasn't a secret to Sheriff Lang. It was something he'd already paid for. I gathered the papers, shoved them back into the envelope, and stared at the window. Outside, the fog had a faint glow to it, like it was lit from below. I stepped closer. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, shapes shifting in the whiteness, the faint impression of faces half-formed by mist. Then, as I watched, the fog receded toward the bay, drawn away as if by the tide itself. A whisper filled the air, not from outside, from beneath the floorboards, a sound like breath escaping from the lungs of the earth. "Carter!" Maggie shot up, ears flat, growling low. I didn't answer. Not this time. When dawn came, I drove back into town. I needed to talk to Sarah. The diner was nearly empty when I walked in. The radio on the counter played low jazz, and the smell of frying bacon filled the air. For a moment, the place almost felt normal. Then Sarah turned and saw me, and all the color drained from her face. "Ethan," her voice cracked, "you shouldn't be here." "I think that ship sailed," I said, sliding into a booth. "We need to talk." She looked around, making sure no one else was close enough to hear. About what? I set the envelope on the table between us. About this. She stared at it but didn't reach for it. Where did you get that? Town hall basement. Your sheriff caught me down there, but not before I found it. Sarah's eyes darted toward the window, toward the street, toward anyone who might be watching. You have to put that back. Why? Because it's the truth? Because the truth will get you killed. I leaned forward. Then tell me, what does removed mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the blind shut and slid into the seat across from me. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and shaking. Every month, the town loses one person, always the first Monday, always someone from outside. If no one new arrives, they find someone passing through, a traveler, a hiker, a trucker who broke down on Route 3. Doesn't matter who. The point is to give the bay what it wants. Her hands trembled as she spoke, but her eyes were steady. What it wants? I asked. The sound, the thing that makes it. We call it the deep. It started after the ferry went down. The survivors, those who lived on shore, said they heard it calling before it sank. A voice under the water like a heartbeat. Every month since then it comes back. If it isn't fed, the sound tears the town apart. The ground shakes, the sea rises, people lose their minds. I stared at her. You're saying this town has been sacrificing people for decades? Sarah nodded once. We don't think of it that way. We think of it as keeping the peace. I laughed. Short, bitter, hollow. And everyone just goes along with it? They don't have a choice, she said. You don't have a choice. What do you mean? She hesitated. Your name's already been written. The diner felt suddenly smaller. The walls seemed to lean in. What are you talking about? She looked down at the table. There's a list kept by the town council, one name each month. Always an outsider, always chosen before the sound begins. I don't know who picks them, but once your name's on it, it doesn't come off. I stared at her, trying to process the words. You mean me? Sarah didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was enough. Outside, the church bell rang. Once, twice. It was only noon, but each toll felt like a countdown. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because someone has to, she said. Because my brother was one of them. I felt my pulse quicken. He was removed? 2 years ago, a drifter from out of state hit him with his car out on Route 108. My brother wasn't supposed to die. The town took that as payment. The sound that month was quiet, barely a tremor, and they decided that was proof it works. Her voice broke on the last word. I wanted to tell her it was insane, impossible, but deep down I knew she wasn't lying. Can you show me the list? I asked. She shook her head. No. It's kept in the council office, and even if you saw it, it wouldn't matter. The names aren't written in ink. What does that mean? Sarah's eyes lifted to mine, filled with something like pity. It means they appear on their own. The bell tolled again. She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. You still have time, Ethan. Get in your car tonight and don't stop until you hit Portland. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I pulled my hand free. And if I don't? Her gaze hardened. Then when the sound comes, you won't need me to explain what happens next. Before I could say anything else, the door opened and Sheriff Lang stepped inside. Sarah's face changed instantly, back to calm, polite, professional. She turned away, pretending to refill a coffee pot. Lang nodded to me the same way he had before. Afternoon, Carter. You settling in? Trying to. Good. Try harder. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. As he turned to leave, I saw something under his collar, an old scar, thin and pale, circling the base of his neck like a rope burn. When he was gone, Sarah whispered, "You didn't hear this from me." I nodded, pocketed the envelope, and walked out into the gray afternoon. The fog was rolling back in, thicker than before. On every door along Main Street, someone had drawn a new symbol in chalk, a spiral curling inward toward a single dot. At first, I thought it was random decoration. Then I noticed the pattern. Every symbol pointed towards the sea. The tide was coming in, and so was something else. By the time I got back to the house, the fog had thickened into a wall. It swallowed sound, light, even the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks below. Maggie paced near the window, ears flat, her reflection flashing each time lightning flickered beyond the bay. I couldn't just wait for whatever was coming. I needed proof, something real, something that couldn't be dismissed as hysteria or folklore. So I did what any rational man pretending not to be terrified would do. I turned my fear into a project. That night, I set up the recording equipment. 3 motion sensors, 2 small microphones, and an old digital recorder that could capture low-frequency sound waves. I placed one mic near the cellar door, one under the porch, and the last out by the fence where the fog seemed thickest. The recorder sat on my desk, its little red light blinking steadily, a heartbeat of its own. If the sound came again, I'd have it on file. Evidence. Data. By 11:00 p.m., I was ready. The fog had turned the world outside into a colorless void. The air tasted metallic like rain before lightning. I poured coffee, sat by the window, and waited. Maggie curled up beside me, her head heavy on my knee. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second louder than the one before. Then, faintly through the glass, came something new. A low rumble, not from the ground this time, but from the direction of the harbor. It grew gradually, layering itself into a pulse that wasn't mechanical or seismic, but alive. I stepped outside, pulling my coat tight, and followed the sound toward the water. The fog was so thick I could barely see my feet, but I could feel vibration under the soles of my boots. I walked by instinct and the faint glow of lanterns ahead. That's when I saw them. Dozens of people standing silently along the pier, men, women, even children, each holding an old-fashioned oil lantern. The lights flickered through the mist like fireflies, reflecting off faces that looked blank, trance-like. No one spoke. No one moved. Sheriff Lang stood at the front, facing the water. His hat was off, his hands clasped in front of him like a man in prayer. For a moment, I thought it was some late-night vigil, a remembrance for the ferry victims or the town's fishermen, but then I noticed the rhythm. Every person there was breathing in unison, long measured inhales and exhales, perfectly timed with the pulse coming from the sea. The fog over the bay seemed to twist, folding inward toward a single point where the water darkened unnaturally. Lang raised one hand. The people fell silent. He began to speak, not words exactly, but a series of sounds, guttural and ancient, like a language built out of the wind itself. The others repeated after him, their voices low, blending into the hum that shook the pier. Maggie whimpered at my side, tail tucked. I crouched and pressed a hand to her collar. "Quiet," I whispered, but she wasn't looking at the people. She was staring at the water. Something moved beneath the surface. Not a fish, not a current, something vast. The water rippled outward in perfect circles, as though the sea itself was breathing in rhythm with the chant. A soft light appeared below the surface, faint at first, then brighter, like a lantern descending instead of rising. The townsfolk didn't flinch. They raised their lanterns higher, and that's when I heard it, the word that had haunted my dreams for days. Carter! It came from the water. The chanting stopped. All heads turned in unison toward me. Lang's voice broke the silence, calm, steady, final. He's here. My legs went numb. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Maggie's leash. The fog thickened instantly, swallowing the dock, the people, the lights. All I could see were their silhouettes, still patient, waiting. "Ethan Carter," Lang called, "you shouldn't have come." The sound in the air deepened, pressing against my chest like invisible hands. I could feel the bones in my skull vibrate. Maggie barked wildly, pulling me toward the shore path. The first lanterns went out. One by one, the flames snuffed themselves until only the sheriff's light remained, a dull orange halo in the mist. He lifted it high. The sea keeps its own. And then he dropped it into the water. The bay erupted. A roar thundered through the fog, so low it felt like the earth was tearing itself open. Water surged upward, crashing against the pier and spraying cold salt into my face. I ran, blindly, breath ragged, through the wet grass toward the house. Maggie ran ahead, barking, leading me by sound when sight was useless. Behind me, the chant resumed, louder now, mixed with the crashing of waves and that impossible resonant hum that made my ribs ache. I reached the porch, slammed the door, and locked every latch I'd built. The floor trembled. Dishes fell from the counter. The recorder on my desk blinked red, capturing everything. Maggie pressed herself against my legs, trembling. I clutched her fur and waited for the sound to stop. It lasted 10 minutes. 10 endless, grinding minutes. Then, suddenly, silence. The fog began to thin. The house stilled. I stumbled to the desk and hit playback. At first, only static, then faintly voices, dozens of them chanting in unison. My name repeated over and over, distorted but unmistakable. And then a new voice, deeper, farther away, layered under the rest. "The debt continues." The recording cut out. I didn't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the sun was already rising. The fog was gone. Birds sang outside as though the world hadn't just trembled in its sleep. I went down to the dock, needing to see it for myself. The boards were slick with salt, footprints leading to the edge, but none returning. And carved into the wood, where Lang had dropped the lantern, were fresh letters, still damp. Ethan Carter, October 6th. That was next Monday. I stared at the inscription until the morning light blurred it into nothing. The next morning broke in shades of gray. The ocean looked like lead, and the gulls stayed hidden in the cliffs. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the carving on the dock, my name, my date. By 6 a.m., I'd made my decision. I was done letting this town dictate what I was allowed to know. I stuffed the envelope of records into my jacket, clipped Maggie's leash to her collar, and drove toward town before the streets filled. The library sat in silence when I pulled up. Only Ruth Davenport's old sedan was parked out front. Inside, the air smelled of salt and paper and something older, like rainwater trapped in stone. She looked up from behind the desk when I entered. Her hair was loose this time, silver strands framing eyes that had seen too much. "I knew you'd come back," she said quietly. "You knew. Or you hoped." "Both." She gestured toward the reading room. "Lock the door behind you." I did. Ruth walked to the back shelves and pulled a heavy ledger bound in cracked leather. Dust rose as she set it on the table. Embossed on the cover were 4 words written in Latin, Annales de profundo mare. "The council ledgers," she said. "You won't find these on any catalog. They've been passed from one librarian to the next since 1943. I ran my fingers over the cover. The leather was cold, damp, as if it had been pulled straight from the bay. "Why me, Ruth? Why is my name on that dock?" Her shoulders sagged. "Because it always comes back to your family. You're Samuel Carter's blood, aren't you?" I nodded. He was my grandfather's brother, died before I was born. "Disappeared," she corrected. "There's a difference." She flipped open the ledger. Pages of spidery handwriting filled both sides. Weather reports, sea temperatures, fishing tallies, and notes written in 2 hands. One neat and mathematical, the other jagged and hurried. The neat one was signed S. Carter, the other no signature at all. I skimmed the early entries. March 1943, unexplained tremor, duration 20 minutes. April 1943, second event, livestock panic, source untraceable. May 1943, sound persists. Town council convened, no action taken. Then, in the margin beside June's entry, Samuel had scrawled, "It speaks when the tide is lowest. It knows my name." A chill went through me. Ruth turned another page. He was the first one to keep records of the sound. Thought he could measure it, explain it, but every time he tried to stop it, the next month's tremor grew worse. "Until the ferry sank," I murmured. She nodded. "He went out there the morning before the Port Ellen vanished, told the council he'd found where the noise came from, said he could end it. And then he never came back." The library lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the stacks, a single book slid from its shelf and hit the floor with a dull thud. Maggie whimpered softly. Ruth didn't move. "Do you believe me now?" "I believe something's happening," I said, "but I want to know what it wants." She closed the ledger gently, as though afraid of waking it. "It doesn't want, it remembers. Every generation someone tries to stop it, and every time it takes one of their own. That's how it keeps the balance." I stared at her. "Then why keep the ledgers? Why record any of it?" "Because if we forget, it grows hungrier." She met my eyes. "And because someone has to bear witness." Outside, fog pressed against the windows. The world beyond had turned white, the glass sweating with condensation. I felt suddenly claustrophobic, like the library itself was a lung filling with mist. Ruth reached beneath the table and pulled out another book, smaller, newer, bound in black. "This one you won't like." She opened it to a blank page, except it wasn't blank. Lines of salt traced faint letters across the paper, glimmering in the dim light. My name again. Beneath it, today's date. "How?" I started, but she raised a hand. "It writes itself," she whispered. "Always a week before the next offering." I touched the page. The salt melted under my fingertip, leaving a wet streak that smelled faintly of the ocean. Ruth shut the book quickly. "You can still leave. The sea hasn't called yet." "If I run, it follows me. That's what you're not saying." Her silence was answer enough. "What happens to you?" I asked. "You've been keeping these records for decades. Doesn't that make you part of it?" She looked toward the fog outside, eyes distant. "I don't keep them for it. I keep them for us, to remind the town that this is a debt, not a blessing." The word debt echoed through me like an old wound. She pushed the ledger toward me. "Take it. Read Samuel's last entry, then decide what kind of man you're going to be." I opened to the final page. The handwriting was frantic, ink blurred by water. June 10th, 1958. The noise is no longer outside. It's in the walls, the air, the bones. If the sea feeds on blood, then maybe it can be starved. I will go to it before it comes for us." Beneath that, scrawled sideways across the bottom margin, "If anyone finds this, remember the truth. The sea does not take. We give." The words hit like a physical blow. Ruth watched me close the book. "Now you know what your ancestor tried to do, and what it cost him." Outside, the church bell rang once, soft, uncertain. Ruth flinched. "It's early," she whispered. "What's early?" "The call. It isn't supposed to come until Monday." We both looked toward the window. The fog was swirling again, darker this time, rising up the street like smoke. I pocketed the ledger. "Then maybe your records aren't finished yet." The fog outside had thickened into a curtain, swallowing the library windows whole. The faint sound of the bell still hung in the air. One chime that didn't fade, just stretched itself into a hum that sat deep inside my chest. Ruth stood by the window, one hand pressed against the glass, as if feeling for a pulse. "It's not supposed to start this soon," she murmured. "Start what?" She turned to me, slowly. "The calling. When it comes early, it means the sea's restless. It means something has gone wrong." I looked down at the ledger in my hands, its water-warped pages fluttering in a wind that didn't exist. Maybe it's tired of waiting. Ruth's face hardened. "Don't joke about it." I didn't. She crossed to a locked cabinet at the back of the archive room, keys jingling softly. "If you're going to understand what's happening to you, what's happening to all of us, you need to see the original pact." She unlocked the cabinet and drew out a small chest made of blackened wood. Salt crystals clung to its edges like frost. She carried it to the table and opened it carefully. Inside lay a leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. "The Codex Mare," she said, "the Book of the Sea." I reached for it, but she hesitated. "Once you open this, you can't unlearn what's inside." "Ruth," I said quietly, "I think that ship's already sailed." She nodded, then unwrapped the oilcloth. The book's pages were vellum, yellowed and brittle, filled with ornate handwriting and symbols that made my stomach turn to ice. Spirals, waves, and what looked like human figures kneeling before something enormous and black. "The town was founded in 1794, Ruth said. "Bar Harbor was just a cluster of fishing shacks back then. The seas were rough, storms constant, boats kept vanishing. So the founding families, Wilson, Frost, Lang, and Carter, made a bargain." She turned the page. I saw 4 signatures written in old ink beneath a single paragraph of text in both English and Latin. "In exchange for calm waters and plentiful harvest, we vow to keep the deep fed. One life given when the moon bleeds, every turning of the tide. So shall we prosper, so shall it sleep." A date followed, March 1794. I stared at the names, the looping letters of Carter, written in the same hand as the ledger I'd taken home. "You're telling me my family helped start this?" "Helped," Ruth said softly. "Your family kept it alive." She turned more pages. Each generation had added new entries. Storms survived, catches doubled, shipwrecks prevented. Each one signed and sealed with what looked disturbingly like fingerprints pressed into dried salt. Then she flipped to the 1950s. The handwriting grew frantic, more modern. "A new section written by my ancestor, Samuel Carter, June 5th, 1958. The council refuses to break the pact. The ferry will sail tomorrow despite warnings. If it sinks, the blood is on us. I'll end this tonight. The sea can't take what it can't find. Underneath, another signature appeared. This one, unfamiliar. Council amendment. The pact shall renew upon Carter's line should the recorder fall. Ruth closed the book. That's why it's you, Ethan. The pact didn't end when he disappeared. It attached itself to his bloodline. You're the recorder now. The air felt thin. I didn't agree to any of this. No one does. The sea doesn't need consent, only continuity. I stepped back, shaking my head. So that's it? Every month you all just hand someone over to keep your calm little harbor? You keep records, tidy ledgers, write down who lives and dies, and call it history? Ruth's expression twisted with guilt. You think I like this? You think any of us do? My grandmother was the first record keeper. She said the alternative was worse. The year she tried to stop it, the bay swallowed 6 boats and half the pier. The next month, the water ran red for 3 days. I stared down at the Codex mare again. The ink shimmered faintly, like it was still wet. What happens if nobody is sacrificed? I asked. The sound grows, Ruth said. It spreads inland. Last time it happened, a man in Bangor went mad. Said he could hear the sea calling his name in the pipes of his house. She looked straight into my eyes. You don't stop the sea, you appease it. Lightning flashed white and blinding through the fogged windows. For a heartbeat, I saw our reflections, 2 ghosts surrounded by books of the dead. I opened my mouth to speak, but a sound cut through the air, a deep, vibrating groan that came from beneath the floorboards. The lights flickered again. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Ruth clutched the Codex to her chest. It's early, she whispered again. Something's changed. The sheriff, I said. The ritual last night, he dropped the lantern before the date. Maybe it woke it up too soon. Her eyes widened. Then the balance is broken. Another tremor rolled through the building, stronger this time. The shelves rattled and one of the stained glass windows cracked straight down the middle. I grabbed the Codex and the ledger. If there's a way to end this, Samuel must have written it down. There has to be something, some way to starve it like he tried to. Ruth's hand clamped around my wrist. Don't make his mistake. You can't starve something that doesn't need to eat. You'll only make it angry. Then maybe it's time someone did. The hum deepened, shaking the lamps until they went out. Only the gray light from the fog remained. I could see my breath in the air, and for a moment it carried words not my own. Echoes forming in the condensation. You cannot unwrite the sea. I turned toward the window. Outside, figures were forming in the mist again, still silent, facing the library. Each one held a lantern. Ruth exhaled shakily. The council. They're coming for the book, I said. No, she whispered. They're coming for you. She moved fast, shoving a heavy key into my hand. The back door. Go to the church. The basement beneath the altar. It's older than the town. If Samuel left anything behind, that's where it'll be. I hesitated. What about you? She looked down at the Codex in her hands. The keeper stays with the record. The library's front doors began to shake, softly at first, then harder, the hinges groaning. Voices murmured outside, chanting the same guttural syllables I'd heard on the pier. Go, Ruth hissed. I ran. As I burst through the back door into the fog, I caught one last glimpse through the window. Ruth standing alone, the Codex mare open before her, her lips moving in prayer as the doors splintered. Then the fog swallowed everything. The fog followed me down Main Street like a living thing, clinging to my clothes, muffling my footsteps. Every street lamp flickered, turning the world into a half-seen watercolor of gray and gold. I kept hearing the echo of Ruth's voice in my head. Go to the church, the basement beneath the altar. Maggie stayed close, fur bristling, her leash taut as a wire. Every few seconds she stopped, nose to the wind, growling at things I couldn't see. The church loomed ahead, small, wooden, with a cross that looked half drowned in the fog. Its doors were locked, but the key Ruth had given me turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for my hand. Inside, the air was heavy, with the scent of old incense and seawater. Candles burned on the altar, though no one was there to light them. Their flames bent in the same direction, toward the sea. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots as I walked to the front. A trapdoor sat behind the pulpit, half concealed beneath a rug. When I pulled it open, cold air rushed up, wet, sharp, carrying that same metallic tang that had haunted my house since the first night. I switched on my flashlight and started down. The stairs were narrow, carved from stone, slick with condensation. Maggie hesitated at the top, whining softly, then followed. The sound of our steps echoed off the walls, a slow, hollow rhythm that made me think of a heartbeat. At the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber that didn't belong to any church I'd ever seen. It was circular, the walls carved with the same spirals I'd seen chalked on doors around town. In the center stood a stone basin filled with water, so black it absorbed the light from my flashlight. Around it lay offerings, rings, coins, faded photographs, bits of bone polished smooth. Maggie growled low, her gaze fixed on the basin. I stepped closer. The surface of the water rippled, even though the air was still. Something was carved along the rim. The sea remembers its debts. I reached out, not touching it, just tracing the letters with my eyes. And then I saw it. Etched faintly beneath the inscription, half worn by time, Samuel Carter, 1958. He had been here. I felt dizzy, as though the ground were tilting. This was where he'd come to end it, the place he'd written about in his final entry. I set the ledger on the edge of the basin and opened it to his last page. The ink shimmered faintly in the beam of my flashlight, and I realized it wasn't ink at all. It was salt. My heart pounded as I read the final words again. If the sea feeds on blood, then maybe it can be starved. But then beneath that, new writing. Letters that hadn't been there before. Wet, fresh. It cannot starve while the line endures. I stumbled back. The air vibrated, a low hum crawling up through the stone floor. The basin's surface began to bubble, faintly at first, then violently, as if something beneath was pushing upward. "Maggie, move!" I shouted. She barked but didn't run. Her eyes were locked on the water, her growl rising into a frantic howl, and then the water stilled. A shape formed beneath it, vague, shifting, a face, not human, not alive. It looked like something carved from the deep itself, skin like translucent glass, eyes black as the void. Its lips didn't move, but its voice filled the chamber. "Carter, the debt remains." The sound wasn't sound. It was vibration inside my bones, in my teeth. I backed away until I hit the wall. "What do you want from me?" The water rippled. "The recorder must return." Images flashed in my head. Samuel standing where I stood, holding the ledger, shouting into the dark. Then the sea rising up to take him, swallowing him whole. "You took him," I said. "Isn't that enough?" The face tilted. "He gave himself. You inherited the record. You write the line. You sustain the tide." I didn't understand, not fully, but the truth pressed against me like pressure from deep water. It wasn't the town feeding the sea. It was me. The ledger, the recordings, every note I'd written, every entry I'd made since I'd moved here. I'd been continuing Samuel's work, continuing the act that kept the sea awake. My words were the offering. I grabbed the ledger, heart racing, and hurled it into the basin. The pages hissed as they hit the water, salt turning to smoke. The hum in the chamber rose into a scream. Maggie barked wildly as the walls began to shake. The water in the basin turned to steam, rising in tendrils that twisted around us. "You can't have me," I shouted. "You can't have any of us." The voice answered with a single word: debt. A burst of cold shot through the room, knocking me backward. The flashlight slipped from my hand and shattered against the wall. In the darkness, the air filled with whispers, dozens, maybe hundreds, blending into a single rising wail. I stumbled toward the stairs, dragging Maggie with me. Behind us, the sound grew louder, wet and furious. Something splashed, something climbed. I ran faster, the walls trembling, dust falling from the ceiling. At the top of the stairs, I slammed the trapdoor shut and threw the rug back over it. Heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The hum didn't follow, not right away. For a long minute I just stood there, gasping in the candlelight, listening. The church was silent except for the faint hiss of wax melting. Then from below the floorboards came a knock. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. Maggie whimpered, pressing against my leg. The knocks stopped, and then a voice whispered up from beneath the floor. "It cannot starve, Ethan. You feed it every time you write." My blood ran cold, because I hadn't said my name out loud. The voice faded, but the echo stayed in my chest like a heartbeat I couldn't control. Maggie was shaking, so was I. The church was darker than before, shadows stretching where there shouldn't have been any light. I knew I couldn't stay. The ledger was gone, burned, dissolved, devoured. But something told me the act of destroying it hadn't ended anything. It had opened something instead. I pushed out through the front doors. The fog had retreated from Main Street, leaving puddles that shimmered faintly with a thin sheen of oil. The air smelled of salt and iron, as if the tide had rolled through the streets while I'd been underground. I had one place left to go. Ruth's library. The windows were dark now, shattered from the inside. The smell of wet ash clung to the air. Inside, every shelf had fallen, every book soaked and torn. The Codex Mare lay on the floor near the center of the room, its pages half burned but still pulsing faintly, the ink shifting, moving like something alive. And then I heard it, a sound like whispering, too faint to be speech, but too purposeful to be random. "Ruth?" Silence. I stepped forward, crunching glass beneath my boots. Maggie stayed at the doorway, whining. Behind the main desk, I found her. Ruth sat in her chair, perfectly still. Her eyes were open, milky and pale, her hands clasped around a single object. A small brass key, the same one she'd given me earlier, but this one was different. Etched along its edge were 2 words: "Final Record." I touched her shoulder gently. Her skin was cold. In her lap lay a single page torn from the codex. The ink on it was fresh, glimmering faintly in the candlelight. "To whoever finds this," I tried to keep it contained. "The record keeper delays the tide, but never stops it. The sea remembers every word we write. It listens through ink, through sound, through thought. If you destroy the record, it moves to the recorder. Ethan, it's yours now." The candles around the room flared at once, the flames rising like they'd been caught in a sudden gust. I stumbled back as a sound rose from the floor, not the thunderous hum from before, but something subtler, wetter, a whispering ripple like water trickling beneath the floorboards. I grabbed the page and the key. "Come on, girl," I said. "We're getting out of here." But when I turned towards the door, figures were standing outside. Not the council this time. Townsfolk, dozens of them, silent, expressionless. Each one held a lantern. The flames inside the glass burned blue. They didn't move as I stepped closer. They simply parted, opening a path down the middle of Main Street. The fog had lifted enough that I could see where it led. Toward the docks. Toward the sea. Maggie growled low. I could feel her pulse trembling through the leash. And then Sheriff Lang stepped out from between the rows of lanterns. His face was calm, almost kind. "Ethan," he said softly, "it's time." "For what?" "To write it down." I held up the page. "Ruth's dead. The ledger's gone. There's nothing left to record." Lang shook his head. "You misunderstand. The record isn't paper, it's memory. And now it's inside you." He gestured toward the docks. "Come with us peacefully, son. It's easier that way." I laughed, a bitter sound that barely escaped my throat. "You want me to die for this town?" Lang's eyes softened. "We all do, one way or another. You just drew the shorter straw." The crowd's lanterns flickered, their blue flames reflecting in the water pooling along the street. The sea breeze carried the faint sound of that low hum again. Distant but growing stronger, I backed up slowly, scanning for a way out, but every alley, every doorway was filled with more faces. Old, young, familiar. People I'd waved to at the market, people who'd smiled at me as if we shared something human. Now they looked like sleepwalkers. Lang stepped closer. "The sea's early this month. You broke the cycle. We can't stop it anymore, only slow it down. But if you go willingly, maybe it'll rest again." "I'm not my ancestor," I said. "No," Lang agreed. "You're worse. You tried to defy it." Maggie barked, sharp and loud, breaking the tension. The sheriff flinched. I took the chance and ran, straight through the line of lanterns. Someone shouted. Hands reached for me, but I ducked and kept moving, boots slamming against the wet pavement. I didn't stop until I reached my house on the edge of town. I slammed the door behind me, locking it, then grabbed the recorder from my desk. The red light blinked, waiting. I hit record. "This is Ethan Carter," I said, my voice shaking. "If you find this, Bar Harbor isn't what it seems. The townspeople are part of something older, a pact they've kept for over 2 centuries. The sea demands a recorder, a witness, someone to keep the story alive. That's how it survives. And now, I think that's me." Outside, the sound deepened. The walls vibrated. Maggie whimpered and hid beneath the table. The lamps flickered, then went out. I could feel it moving beneath the floor. Not water this time, but something aware. It pulsed like a heartbeat, syncing with my own. I looked down. Lines of salt were forming on the wooden floorboards, spelling words in faint white crystals. "Write, Ethan." My hand moved before I told it to. I picked up a pen. The page beneath me stayed blank, but I kept writing anyway. Words spilling out of me, words I didn't understand. They felt ancient, familiar. The hum grew louder until it became a roar. Every light in the house flared white, then burst. The last thing I remember was the sound of the front door opening, and Ruth's voice whispering behind me, "The keeper never dies, Ethan. We just change shape." Then silence. The recorder clicked off. When I woke, the house was dry, quiet. The air smelled of salt. Maggie was gone. I found the recorder still running, battery blinking red. I hit play. My own voice came out, calm and steady. "It's done. The record continues. The tide will rest another generation." I don't remember saying that. I don't remember anything after the light. I stepped outside. The sky was clear, the ocean still. The townsfolk waved as I passed, their smiles polite and distant. And when I walked by the dock, I saw that the carvings had changed. My name was gone. In its place was a new one. Sheriff Daniel Lang, recorder. A week passed. The sea was calm again. The town pretended nothing had ever happened. Each morning I woke to the same rhythm. Gulls calling, church bells chiming the hour, the scent of salt through the open window. For a while, I almost believed I'd dreamed it all. The fog, the ritual, Ruth's body, the blue lanterns. But the house wasn't the same. The walls breathed. Not like a metaphor. They breathed. In the still hours before dawn, I'd hear the soft inhale and exhale of air through the wood grain, as if the structure itself were alive, listening. Maggie was gone, but her leash hung by the door like a memorial. Sometimes I swore I heard her nails clicking across the floor when I wasn't looking. I told myself it was just my imagination, grief, exhaustion, anything but what it felt like. The townspeople smiled at me again. At the cafe, the waitress poured my coffee and said, "Morning, Mr. Carter, glad you're settling in." At the market, the old man by the register nodded. "Quiet month so far, huh?" Their eyes were bright, friendly, normal. Too normal. Like people reading lines they'd practiced 1,000 times. Then one afternoon, I saw her, Ruth. She was standing outside the library wearing the same navy cardigan, adjusting a "closed for repairs" sign on the door. Her hair caught the light just as it had before, the same silver strands escaping her bun. For a second, my brain refused to believe what I was seeing. "Ruth?" I called. She looked up, smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "It's me, Ethan, from last week. You gave me the key to the—" Her brow furrowed slightly, as if she were trying to remember a dream that had already dissolved in daylight. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "You must have me confused with someone else." Then she went back inside. I stood there on the sidewalk, staring through the glass door. The shelves were back in place, the floor spotless, every book dry and whole. Even the Codex Mare sat behind the desk, perfectly intact, its cover gleaming as if it had never burned. I wanted to go in, to grab it, to scream until she remembered, but something stopped me, because for the first time I noticed the reflection in the glass. Me standing outside. Except it wasn't my reflection. The man in the window was older, gray at the temples, a faint scar running across his cheek. He blinked when I didn't. He moved a second too slow, and when I turned around to check the street behind me, there was no one there. That night, I sat by the window with my recorder running. The air outside was still, the waves gentle against the pier. I pressed play on one of my old recordings, the one I'd made the night everything went wrong. Static filled the room, then my own voice. "If you find this, Bar Harbor isn't what it seems." But beneath it, faint and trembling, came another voice, whispering the same words, but in a different tone. Slower, rougher, Samuel's voice. "If you find this, Bar Harbor isn't what it seems." The same cadence, the same pauses, layered like an echo across time. I turned the volume up. The background noise grew. Ocean waves, yes, but deeper than that. Voices, hundreds of them, stacked together, whispering, murmuring, breathing through the static, each one saying a single word. "Witness." I turned the recorder off. The silence afterward felt heavier than the sound. When I looked down at the table, I saw that the condensation from my coffee cup had left an outline in the shape of a wave. The next morning, I returned to the library. Ruth was there again, arranging books behind the counter. The smell of paper and dust filled the air. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "Can I help you find something?" I hesitated. "Do you still have the local archives, the council records?" She smiled, the exact same way she had the first time I met her. "Of course, follow me." We walked to the back of the library. Everything was in its place. The filing cabinets, the ledgers, even the old lamp that had flickered during our first conversation. Only one thing was different. The ledger I'd taken, Samuel's ledger, sat on the table, closed, pristine, dry. Ruth ran her hand over it, affectionately. "That one's my favorite. The handwriting's beautiful, isn't it?" I opened it, my pulse pounding. The pages were filled with neat lines of text in Samuel's hand, but every word I'd seen before, the fear, the desperation, was gone, replaced by calm, orderly notes. Monthly tremor minimal, conditions stable, recorder satisfied. At the bottom of the final page, a new entry, dated 2 days ago, recorder replaced, witness appointed. I felt my stomach twist. "Ruth, what does this mean?" She looked at me, confused. "It's always been that way." "No, it hasn't. I was here, Ruth. You showed me the codex. You gave me the key." Her smile didn't fade, but something behind her eyes shifted. A flicker of pity, maybe. "You should get some rest, Mr. Carter. Sometimes the fog plays tricks on the mind." I stared down at the page again. The ink shimmered faintly in the light, not black this time, but deep ocean blue. It pulsed once, and for a moment I could swear I heard my own voice whisper from the page. "Stop reading!" I slammed the book shut. When I looked up, Ruth was gone. Not gone like she'd walked away. Gone like she'd never been there. The air where she'd stood shimmered faintly, and a fine mist of salt drifted down onto the desk. Outside, the bell tower began to ring. One low, resonant note that didn't stop. The sound filled the library, filled the street, filled me. And for the first time I understood what Samuel had meant when he wrote that the sound wasn't outside anymore. It was in the walls, in the air, in the blood, and it was calling me by name. The next few days bled together in a haze of sleeplessness and paranoia. The bell had finally stopped ringing, but the echo of that single note still hummed in my bones. I kept replaying the moment Ruth vanished, the salt dust hanging in the air, her words, "It's always been that way." Every night I'd leave my recorder running, hoping to capture something, proof that what I'd seen was real. And every morning I'd play it back to find hours of silence. No footsteps, no whispers, no hum. Just the faint crackle of static in my own breathing. Until Thursday morning. That's when I heard the knock on my door. "Ethan!" The voice was familiar, grounding in a way nothing else had been lately. I opened the door to see Liam, my old friend from Boston, the one I'd sent the recordings to months ago. He stood there in a heavy coat, travel-stained, eyes sharp with concern. "Jesus, man," he said. "You look like hell." "I feel worse." He stepped inside, brushing off his coat. "You stopped answering my calls. I figured I'd drive up. Make sure you hadn't drowned yourself in whatever gothic nightmare you've been writing about." "I told you not to listen to those files." "I did anyway." He looked at me seriously. "And Ethan, your voice is on them, not just the ones you sent, on others, old ones. From archives, newsreels, even a broadcast from the 1960s. I stared at him. "That's not possible." He pulled a small recorder from his bag, clicked play, and the room filled with sound. The first voice was mine. My normal voice, recorded just weeks ago. If you find this, Bar Harbor isn't what it seems. Then, layered beneath it, fainter, distorted by age. If you find this, Bar Harbor isn't what it seems. The second voice was lower, slower, but undeniably mine. Liam lowered the recorder. That one's from a maritime broadcast in 1965. I found it in the Maine Historical Audio Archive. The file's been digitized, but the metadata says it's authentic. I sat down hard. You think it's some kind of prank? He shook his head. No, I think this thing you've stumbled into isn't just local. I think whatever's happening here has been happening for generations, and you're part of it. I laughed, but it came out thin and brittle. You think I'm some kind of ghost on tape? I don't know what to think. He hesitated, then added, There's more. He pulled out a second recorder, newer, digital. This one I left running in my hotel last night. You want to hear what I woke up to? He hit play. At first, just wind, then water, waves lapping, and then a voice. My voice. Liam, you shouldn't have come. The blood drained from my face. Liam watched me, searching for an explanation. That was recorded at 3:17 a.m. I was asleep the whole time. Did you leave the window open? No. I stood up and started pacing. It's not possible. It's like the seas copying us, replaying us. He frowned. Or maybe it's recording us. The words hit harder than I expected. Recording us. That was exactly what Samuel had written in the ledger. It listens through ink, through sound, through thought. Liam, I said quietly, where's the recorder you used last night? He pointed to his bag. I pulled it out and pressed play again. This time, after my voice faded, another voice whispered over the static. Faint, distant, but distinct. The witness arrives. We stared at each other. What the hell does that mean? Liam asked. Before I could answer, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then died. The room plunged into darkness except for the dim glow of the recorder's red light. A soft sound filled the air. Water dripping, but it wasn't coming from the roof or the pipes. It was coming from the walls. Ethan, Liam said, tell me that's not... The rest of his sentence drowned beneath a low hum, not loud this time, but deep, the kind that vibrated in the chest cavity more than the ears. Maggie barked, except Maggie was gone. I turned toward the sound, and for a moment I saw her silhouette in the window, soaked, shaking, tail wagging weakly. Then she was gone again, replaced by the reflection of my own face. Liam grabbed my shoulder. We need to leave, right now. But when we opened the door, the fog was waiting, thick, impenetrable, and silent. The whole town had vanished behind it. This isn't real, Liam whispered. Oh, it's real, I said. It's just not ours. We stumbled into the street, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the white void. Every sound felt amplified. Our footsteps, our breathing, the distant rhythm of waves somewhere ahead. The fog thinned as we neared the docks. Shapes began to emerge, boats, ropes, and the faint outline of the memorial dock. Liam stopped suddenly. Ethan. I followed his gaze. On the wooden planks, fresh carvings glimmered in the damp. Not one name this time. Dozens. The letters were clean, perfect, freshly cut, and every name was the same. Ethan Carter. Over and over. I felt my stomach twist. Behind us, something moved. The sound of water dripping off boots. We turned. A figure stood in the fog, face hidden by shadow. A lantern in one hand and a recorder in the other. Who are you? Liam called out. The figure tilted its head. Then it pressed a button on the recorder. My own voice filled the fog, calm and detached. "I told you not to come, Liam." He froze. The figure stepped closer. Its face came into the light, and my heart stopped. It was me. Older, wetter, eyes dark and hollow like the sea. I reached for the reel recorder in my pocket, fumbling to hit record again, but my fingers felt numb. The other me smiled, slow, understanding. "It doesn't matter anymore. You already pressed play." Then everything went black. I woke to the gray light of dawn bleeding through the fog. The world was silent except for the slow rhythm of the tide. Cold boards pressed against my back. I was lying on the dock, alone. Liam's jacket was gone, so was he. Only his recorder remained sitting upright beside me, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. I pressed play, static, waves, wind, then my own voice. "Keep listening, it remembers through us." I sat upright, pulse hammering. I didn't remember saying that. The words came again, clearer, older, the accent slightly different. Samuel's voice. I followed the sound. Each whisper seemed to pull me towards the lighthouse that stood at the edge of Bar Harbor's cliffs, the one everyone called the Watcher. The path was slick with dew, grass bending under my boots. Gulls circled overhead but made no sound. The door to the lighthouse stood half open, hinges rusted but moving easily, as if it had been used recently. Inside, dust hung in thin beams of pale light. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with reels of magnetic tape labeled by hand. Each carried a date, some reaching back to the 1800s. The ink on the oldest labels had faded to gray, but the last few were unmistakable. E. Carter, current. I turned on one of the old players. The tape spun, whispering with static until a faint voice broke through. Fishermen describing the monthly noise, a councilman praying over an empty sea, Ruth reading from the Codex Mare. The voices layered, overlapping, forming a chorus that rose and fell with the rhythm of waves. They weren't random, they were memory, preserved like sound fossils, each one trying to tell the next what had happened. The last reel clicked to an end, then rewound itself automatically. A soft click echoed behind the shelves. I found a narrow stair spiraling downward, carved into the stone itself. The air grew colder as I descended. At the bottom lay a natural cavern where seawater glowed faintly through cracks in the rock. In the center stood a rusted recording device, an ancient wind-up reel connected by copper wires that disappeared into the wall. I turned the crank. The reels began to spin, slow at first, then faster. The cave filled with the low pulse of the ocean, steady as breathing. Beneath that, hundreds of voices murmured together, men, women, children, each repeating the same line until it became a tide of words. The sea does not hunger, it echoes. The meaning hit me like cold air. All this time we'd believed the sea demanded lives to feed its silence, but it wasn't asking for sacrifice. It was asking to be remembered. Each recorder hadn't been chosen to appease it, but to carry its story forward, to make sure the truth didn't vanish beneath fear. The horror wasn't the sound itself. It was the silence we built around it. I set my small digital recorder beside the ancient one, pressed record and spoke softly into the still air. "If you can hear me, I'll keep the story. You don't need to take anyone else." The hum in the rock slowed, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. The glow in the water dimmed to a soft silver, calm and steady. For the first time since moving to Bar Harbor, the world was completely quiet. No trembling in the floorboards, no shudder in the air, just stillness deep and pure. When I climbed back toward daylight, the fog had lifted. Sunlight touched the waves, turning them to glass. The town lay below, ordinary again. Boats rocking gently, the bell tower standing straight against the blue sky. I didn't know if I'd ended the curse or simply joined the endless chain of recorders before me. But as I walked away from the watcher, the sea stayed calm, and that was enough for now. By late afternoon, the town looked almost peaceful. Boats drifted in the harbor. The air smelled of pine and salt, and for the first time in months, the water was perfectly still. I should have felt free, but something in that stillness kept me uneasy, like a held breath waiting to be released. I walked home through Main Street. People greeted me the same as always, yet I noticed little details I'd never seen before. The way conversation stopped when I passed, how no one mentioned the monthly noise anymore. The town had slipped into a kind of polite amnesia. That night I sat on the porch watching the tide change. My recorder lay on the table beside a notebook, still running. Its red light blinked steadily, the sound of the ocean a calm heartbeat in the background. When the first stars appeared, I began to speak, not as a warning this time, but as a record. If anyone hears this, know that Bar Harbor stands quiet again. The sea has given us peace, but peace bought with silence never lasts. What it wants isn't fear or even worship. It wants to be remembered. A faint breeze rose from the water, carrying the scent of rain. The sound of the waves deepened, almost like a sigh. I thought of Samuel, of Ruth, of every person who'd carried this story before me. They hadn't been cursed. They'd been chosen to hold memory so the next generation wouldn't live in ignorance. The sea didn't punish. It reminded. The fog lights on the pier glimmered faintly, but no shapes moved within them, only the steady rhythm of the tide. I turned off the recorder and sat quietly, letting the night settle. The crickets started their soft chorus. Somewhere down the hill, church bells rang the hour. For the first time, it didn't sound like a warning. The next morning, the town awoke to calm weather and sunlight, bright enough to make the bay sparkle. Fishermen prepared their nets. Children chased each other along the boardwalk. Everything looked ordinary again. Maybe too ordinary, but I could live with that. At the library, I left a single envelope on Ruth's desk. Inside were the surviving pages from Samuel's ledger and a note written in my hand. Keep this open. Don't hide it again. As I stepped outside, the wind carried the faintest echo of my own words from the recorder back home. The sea does not hunger. It echoes. I smiled, unsure whether it was real or memory. When the next first Wednesday arrived, no tremor shook the ground. The windows stayed still. The birds kept singing. The town exhaled. I walked to the shore with Maggie's leash in my pocket and let the waves reach my shoes. The water was cool, steady, gentle. Somewhere deep below, a low sound thrummed. Less a threat than a heartbeat, steady and patient. I understood it now. Stories don't end, they change shape. The tide had rewritten ours, turning fear into memory, silence into voice. As the sun set, I spoke one last line into the wind, more to the ocean than to myself. We remember. Then I turned away from the water and walked back toward the town that, at last, was learning to live without secrets. Winter came softly to Bar Harbor, the kind that muted every sound until the whole world felt wrapped in wool. Snow rested heavy on rooftops. The harbor was a pane of silver glass, and the sky hung low enough to touch. The sea, once violent and unpredictable, had been still for months. I woke early most mornings, not because of nightmares anymore, but because the silence had its own rhythm. The old house creaked less now that I'd repaired its bones. Paint peeled slower. Even the walls seemed to have exhaled. Life returned to a pattern. I fixed the porch railing, replaced the broken panes, started walking Maggie along the icy shoreline again. People in town had changed too, gentler, polite in a way that made you wonder what they weren't saying. They waved when I passed, but rarely stopped to talk. No one mentioned the monthly noise anymore. As if it had been a bad dream everyone agreed to forget. Yet I still felt watched. Not in a menacing way, more like being remembered. The gulls gathered on the docks in strange spirals, moving with a rhythm that mirrored the tides. Some nights, the air itself seemed to hum faintly when the moon reached its peak, a vibration you could only feel if you stood perfectly still. That was when I began to write again. My new project wasn't fiction. I called it The Record of the Tide. I wanted to tell the truth, what really happened in this small Maine town by the sea. Not to sensationalize it, but to honor it, to make sure that silence didn't bury it again. I wrote by the window each night, the glow of my desk lamp spilling across the snow, the sea breathing quietly beyond. It felt peaceful, almost sacred. But peace in Bar Harbor was never simple. At first, writing came easily. Paragraphs about the past, about Ruth, about Samuel, about the way sound could shape memory. Then, small things began to change. I'd wake to find my notes rearranged, phrases written in my own handwriting that I didn't remember writing. The witness endures. The sea never sleeps. They didn't frighten me. They read more like reminders than warnings. Still, I couldn't explain how they appeared. One night, the words on my laptop screen shifted before my eyes. Letters slid softly across the page, like the pull of a tide, forming a single line that hadn't been there before. Tell it again. I stared at it for a long time. Then I saved the file and left it as it was. A week later, Clara, Bar Harbor's new librarian, visited my home. She was young, curious, the kind of person who smiled with her whole face. She carried an envelope in her gloved hands. "I think this belongs to you," she said. "It was on my desk this morning, opened itself sometime last night." It was the envelope I'd left for Ruth months ago. Inside lay the same worn ledger, the town's history, the list of names. Only now a new line shimmered in blue ink across the final page. Recorder released. Witness remains. I touched the page. The ink was still wet. "Did you write this?" Clara asked. I shook my head. "No, but I think it means the story isn't over." In March, a journalist arrived in town. Her name was Lauren Pierce, a travel writer from Boston doing a piece on New England's hidden myths. She'd heard rumors about Bar Harbor's strange past, fishermen vanishing, the monthly hum, the stories people avoided. She found me through the bookstore, asked if I'd speak with her. I hesitated at first, then agreed to meet her at the diner. Lauren reminded me of myself when I'd first moved here, curious, logical, convinced there was an explanation for everything. She carried 2 notebooks and a recorder, asking questions with polite determination. "What really happened here, Mr. Carter?" she asked. "The town had its ghosts," I said after a pause. But the real haunting was silence. People stopped talking about what mattered, and when stories go quiet long enough, they find other ways to be heard. She smiled, not quite understanding, but sensing I meant it. "Maybe I'll write about that someday." "Just remember to tell it right," I said. When she left, the fog had rolled in again. By the time I got home, I found her business card pinned to my front door. On the back, in faint, salt-stained handwriting, were 6 words that chilled and comforted me at once. Thank you for keeping it awake. I stood on the porch for a long time, reading those words over and over. The sea was calm that night, but I could feel its quiet pulse through the ground beneath my feet. That was when I realized the cycle hadn't ended. It had evolved. The story itself was now the vessel, the memory carried not by bloodlines or rituals, but by words, by people like me. That evening I sat at my desk with the recorder beside me. The red light blinked slowly, patiently, waiting. Outside, the waves brushed softly against the rocks below the cliff. I pressed record. "My name is Ethan Carter," I began. "I came to Bar Harbor looking for quiet. I found a story that never ends. But maybe that's all any of us are, echoes in a larger tide." I paused, letting the silence between sentences settle like dust in sunlight. "If someone finds this, don't be afraid of the noise. It's only memory trying to speak. Listen to it." I stopped the recording, but the red light didn't fade. It kept blinking, slow and steady. I smiled faintly. Outside, the bay shimmered under the moonlight. The surface rippled once, as if something deep below had exhaled. And then came the faintest hum, not a roar, not a warning, just the soft vibration of something alive, content to be heard. The sea kept its rhythm, the air tasted clean, and for the first time the story didn't feel like a burden. It felt like belonging. "The sea keeps memory," I whispered. "We keep telling it back." Fade to black.
Listen to me. The time is near. You must rise now, they are waiting.